Hello, welcome to this inaugural session of She and Rights Live from Women Deliver Conference 2020. She and Rights Live at the Women Deliver Conference 2026 sessions are being hosted at D03 Exhibition Space in Narrm, Melbourne, Australia. All sessions are hybrid, live streamed, and host online and on-site. Mirror with ground realities of denial of the right to a large majority of humanity. This is so very unacceptable. Without any further ado, let me invite our opening speaker, Kate Lappin, Regional Secretary of Public Services International Asia Pacific, to set the stage for us before Women Deliver Conference 2026 opens.
Hi, Kate.
Hi, Ananya.
Hi. So I had a question. So I heard that we, Public Service International, we're collaborating with the Citizen News Service for the Women
any case, to bring some of our message to the global feminist movement that attends.
Well, that's great. I realize that there is quite a lot that's going to be happening at the conference. But I was wondering, so you were talking about the ILO, but a global platform like this, what do you think? What opportunities does it present for the trade union movement?
Well, there's not many formal opportunities. It's there, but because I think the agenda is very well orchestrated, and it's mainly, I guess, donors and leading feminist thinkers. And although it's a very large gathering, perhaps there is a need for this sort of gathering, given that in the world at the moment there's a strong backlash against women's rights and feminist movements. And of course, we know that billionaires have a lot of gathering opportunities, and they really can rights and feminist analysis of particularly of the way that care has been corporatized, and that social protection is so critical to advancing women's rights, but also to the work we've done on LGBTQI rights, on Indigenous rights, on trying to be as inclusive as possible. We do draw on progressive trade union histories that have shown that the way to achieve change is through trade union power and, quite frankly, through disruption. We haven't gained the things we've gained through quiet advocacy, through just requesting changes to law, or even through deep analysis. It's really been through our capacity to join analysis with action. And in Melbourne, one of the interesting parts of its history is that we have, first of all, the oldest continuously operating trade union building in the world that celebrates its history, both feminist history and labour history, of being the first place in the world to achieve the 8-hour day.
Wow.
Yeah, that have the 888 framework, which is going back now about 170 years.
Wow.
Also the first place in the world to achieve a living wage. It was a sexist living wage at the time, setting a wage for men and assuming women were dependents, but it established a living wage as a principle. That more recently we've been one of the first places in the world, or leading in the world, on pay equity, to give increases to workers in the care sector who, through a process of recognising the devaluation of women's work, not through a male comparator, but through recognising that historically work of that is majority of women in care has been devalued because it's delivered by women. So that's a really critical achievement, and some of the work we've done in PSI but has been done particularly by trade unions in Melbourne or its state of Victoria on things like looking at the reproductive rights of women through their whole life cycle. Of course, we've all familiar with work on parental leave or maternity leave. This extends that to looking at other issues through the life cycle that women and non-binary people and men might need in their life, their reproductive life, whether that be about using IVF, whether that be about menstrual leave, whether that be about menopausal leave. So those sorts of things have been important to achieve in the work that unions have done that complement the feminist movement.
Well, that sounds incredible. And I'm really hoping and looking forward to the conference now. Let's see where and how we can really, the feminist movement and the labor movement can really come together to build the power of workers and, get some disruption done.
Yeah, I think that this is one of our main problems, of course, is that how do we use the power we have? And I think the conference itself won't address that. I don't think I see anything on the agenda that looks at how we can collaboratively build enough power that addresses the global problems. I think there's some important moments to talk about local movements that have built power, but we have a challenge ahead of ourselves right now that we're an unprecedented monopolisation of power is occurring in the hands of a tiny minority, whether that be big tech and the billionaires and the governments that serve them. Of course, we know the US government, but many other governments as well, are failing to respond to the needs of working class people. Yeah. So one thing perhaps at this conference that might not happen in the plenary, that could possibly happen in the sidelines, are those discussions around how can we actually think of the practical ways to disrupt global power through alliance building. That isn't really just about speaking opportunities or even strong analysis, but really does think about the level of solidarity that's required to achieve system change.
Great. So, well, thanks for talking to me.
You're welcome. Anytime.
With 2 decades of experience supporting movements led by women, girls, transgender, non-binary, and intersex people, now let us listen to Dr. Harjyot Khosa. Let me invite our opening speaker, Kate Lappin, Regional Secretary of Services International Asia Pacific, to set the stage. Women Deliver Conference 2026 opens. Now let us listen to Dr. Harjyot Khosa, a noted feminist and a global health advocate with 2 decades of experience supporting movements led by women, girls, transgender, non-binary, and intersex people and collectives.
Good morning, everyone. I'm so happy that we all are here to strategize and shift power. Change has indeed called us all here. This is 2026, my friends, and we need to disrupt the feminist ideology. push for radical and intersectional structural changes. With the current right-wing uproar, we need to remember we are here for sexual reproductive health, rights, and justice, not just reproductive health. Let's just stop calling it that. I'm so happy that the third edition of She Rights and Media Awards are aiming to combat the rise in anti-rights narrative. Why now? We recently saw what happened at CSW. Regressive states are attempting to reverse the established language on bodily autonomy and human rights. We need to do something. The war economics, the gendered cost of conflicts that women are paying, the unpaid care, where there is, look at what's happening in Ukraine and Middle East. Women are forced to fill the gap of public services, of the collapsing public health systems, the criminalized activism, the bans on the targeted feminist mobilization. We saw it in Pakistan. What we saw in India, that the Trans Amendment Bill 2026 is removing the right to self-identification. We need to stop the use of pseudoscience being used to justify these rollbacks and the framing of gender ideology. We are done. Remember, we need to decolonize finance. We need to have radical inclusivity. We need to talk about the digital resistance. So where do we go from here? We need to pivot intersectionality. We need to talk about climate, about tech, We need to talk about climate justice and bring along women from all diversities, women in sex work, women who use drugs, young girls, indigenous women. And we need to talk about gender-aware safety standards for AI. Why are we not talking about it? It's high time. We have the cross-movement solidarity, merge all forces together. The feminist movement at the center with LGBT activism, with anti-racism, with disability rights. We need to have a unified front against the hierarchical oppression that we are facing today. Fund the grassroots, please. Just 0.2% goes to feminist organizations. We need to talk of putting health in hands of women. Let's talk about self-care as a path to autonomy in SRHR. Talk about confidentiality, safety, informed choice. I just want to say that we are done asking for a seat at the table. We are done trying to fit out. Changing what the table looks like is something that I have, taken this message from the recent speech of Canadian Prime Minister that, either you are at the table or on the menu, my friends. We have to be at the table now. Thank you.
Last but definitely not the least, I invite my dear friend Matcha Phorn-in, a fierce feminist advocate who founded and directs Sangsan Anakot Yawachon Foundation on Thai-Laos border.
Good morning. My name is Matcha Phorn-in. I am a Lao lesbian feminist, a woman human rights defender, and a trail runner. In order to respond to the question on gender equality and right to health, taking primacy in developments, I would like to emphasize on three key issues in order to respond to this question. One, context. Second, situation faced by women and LGBTIQ, particularly from and indigenous communities. 3, demand. Started from the context, my work focused on advancing rights of indigenous women, children, and LGBTIQ communities along Thai-Myanmar border area deeply affected by development projects and extractive industries. We are witness indigenous communities that fight against upcoming development projects such as hydropower dam in Sarawin River, Yuam River diversions, and the impact of rare earth mining operations. These activities have led to the environmental degradations and water contamination, not only in the Sarawin River, but also Gok, Ruak, Sai, and Mekong River. These so-called development projects are not neutrals. They are causing human rights violations, environmental crises, and critically, they are not placed gender equality or right to health at the center. The second point that I would like to raise is what are the community affected now? The marginalized community, especially indigenous women, children, and LGBTIQ are affected. One, the lack of recognitions. The indigenous people in Thailand do not recognize by law. Second, when the recognition are not in place, the governments and development sectors fail to implement the most important principle, which is free, prior, and informed consent or EPIC. Therefore, many projects that are upcoming or are impacted now do not take this into an account, and indigenous communities, especially women and LGBTIQ, are not included in decision-making processes at all levels. Third, the gender-based violence including violence against women, girls, and LGBTIQ, with limitations not only access to justice when it comes to the gender-based violence, but also access to health and collective care at large is also limitations for homophobia, transphobia, biphobia. Our indigenous community do not have fully men and women LGBTIQ are existing, but when it comes to participation, decision making, or violation, the root cause is homophobia, biphobia, transphobia, which actually reinforced in the patriarchal societies. 5. The legal gaps. There are, for example, marriage equality exists last year when it's part everyone's celebration, but the thing that we need to recognize, we are in the binary law and policy. Therefore, many laws related to marriage equality still need to change. 6. The discriminations against trans, non-binary people, especially in the access to gender affirming care. Forget about, in the armed conflict. This is such an important issue that we have to ensure that this will be in place for everyone. Second, the barrier to sexual reproductive health and rights, especially in the armed conflict area. Therefore, I would like to conclusion and also raise the demand. First, gender equality and right to health need to be in place at the core of all development policies and investments. Second, there is the need to full recognition of indigenous people and their rights. Third, the implementation of ensure. Second, there is the need to full recognition of indigenous people and their rights. Third, the implementation of free, prior, informed and consent need to be committed and take it into account of all government and development sectors. The most importantly, accountability for human rights violation and environmental harm caused by development projects and business activities need to encounter and hone at all levels. The other issue that very important is on the inclusive and non-discrimination in the healthcare system, include access to gender affirming care and sexual reproductive health and rights services. In terms of law and policy reform that are beyond symbolic, the recognition need to ensure real equality, especially for women and LGBTIQ in all contexts. Last but not least, on protection of the human rights defenders, we are seeing the patterns of judicial harassments against human rights defender, especially when we are standing to fight to stop development projects or business activity. Therefore, we would like to pushing for protections of all human rights defender, especially women human rights defender and LGBTIQ human rights defenders. Last but not least, I would like to highlight the development projects and the government sectors must not come at the cost of our bodies, our land, and our dignities. If gender equalities and right to health are not at the center, then it's not the development, it's harm. Thank you very much. Phorn-in. I am a
Thanks a
Lao
lot,
lesbian
Kate,
feminist,
Harjyot, and
a woman
Matcha,
human
for
rights
setting the
defender,
stage
and
today.
a trail runner.
Friends, the glacier
In
of
order to
patriarchy
respond
will
to
not
the
melt
question
on its own. And perhaps calling it a glacier is not a good analogy, as patriarchy is explosive for our lives like a volcano. But the clarity is crystal clear within us that we have to reclaim the feminist narrative and our long overdue rights, entitlements, and privileges. Gender inequalities and injustices must end with us.